longing soul is filled with wandering awe as the Savior's tender mercy heals the wounds of all my sin. I praise the love that makes me whole again. I come in hope, I come in faith to feel the touch of His redeeming grace. As I offer in my broken heart, He heals the hurt within. And I praise the love that makes me whole again. Hallelujah, my healing spirit cries as He reaches out His hand to bid me rise. Hallelujah, praise the healer of all men, who makes me more than what I was, sees beyond who I am. And when I fall, He lifts me up, restores my soul, removes my bitter cup. For He heals my every heartache, and He carries all my pain. And I praise the love that makes me whole again. Hallelujah, my healing spirit cries as He reaches out His hand and bids me rise. Hallelujah, praise the healer of all men, who makes me more than I was and sees beyond what I am. And when I fall, He lifts me up, restores my soul, removes my bitter cup. For He heals my every heartache, and He carries all my pain. And I praise the love that makes me whole again. I praise the love. I praise the love that makes me whole
We're going to continue talking about men, women issues today. So I've asked Melissa to join me because it's always good to have the female representation of this conversation, or else it can be a very one-sided conversation. So I've entitled it Love and Respect, and you'll understand if you weren't here last week why today's message is entitled Love and Respect. So I'm going to invite you to turn with me in your Bibles to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. We'll start in 1 Corinthians 7 just reading what Paul had to say about marriage. Actually, not very encouraging if you're planning to get married, or if you are married, it can almost come across like you made a mistake. Because the essence of Paul's counsel in 1 Corinthians 7, after saying that men and women that are married have a responsibility to each other, is essentially don't get married. That's the counsel. So we could just end the conversation there. But In other places, Paul seems to say that marriage is a very good thing, and he gives counsel to married couples. Some of it's here in 1 Corinthians 7 for those that decide they want to go on and get married contrary to his counsel. And in other places, he gives further counsel to help enhance husbands and wives' relationships. Here in 1 Corinthians 7, after saying that if you're single, stay that way, and it was very time sensitive, Paul's counsel. It wasn't universal and it wasn't for all times. It was because of the situation that the church was living in at that time. So it's not a biblical mandate that single people should never get married. Obviously, if that had been the case, then it would contradict other counsel he has in other places. But he says, don't get married because of the times and because of the circumstances that the church is facing. And then in verse 28 of 1 Corinthians 7, Paul says, but even if you do marry, in other words, it's not a sin to marry. He's just giving good counsel. Hey, don't get married. It's better, trust me, because of the times. But he says, even if you do marry, verse 28, you have not sinned. And if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. Nevertheless, and here's the point that I want to bring from this passage, nevertheless, if you do get married, those who get married will have trouble in the flesh, but I would spare you. So that's Paul's counsel there in 1 Corinthians 7. Don't get married, and if you do get married, get ready because you're going to have some challenges. And I want to spare you, and that's why I'm telling you not to get married. Now, especially because of the times that they were living. You know, when you're going through persecution and you have to flee your home and you have to experience what the Christians were experiencing at that particular time in the experience of the church, it's better not to have children. It's better not to have a wife either. I mean, Paul, the kind of lifestyle he had, traveling and going from place to place, under the circumstances he lived, he was better off single. And so in Ephesians chapter 5, Sawyer just read it. In Ephesians chapter 5, we're going to read Paul's counsel to married couples here. And I think this is the clearest and most detailed counsel that Paul gives. And we started talking about this last year. And remember, last week, Paul said, you're going to have trouble in the flesh. And Melissa touched on this last week when she said, getting married is like moving to a foreign country. You have to learn the culture when you move to a different country. You have to learn the language, not just the language, but how people process and think and what their ways of doing things are. And the same is true with uniting your life with another person of a different gender. Because the Bible teaches that though men and women are equal, they are different. And the Bible is very clear about the fact that God made men and women, male and female, he created them in the image of God as a partnership, but different and complementary nonetheless. And in Ephesians chapter 5, to the chagrin of many who are very idealistic and very involved in the women's rights movement, Paul gives very gender-specific advice in Ephesians chapter 5. And some people have come away with the idea that Paul was reflecting the patriarchal mode of thinking of the times. But I believe that Paul was not simply reflecting his culture, but there was something about how God created men and women that he is tapping into here that's very important. And we're going to deal with that today. We're especially going to look at Ephesians chapter 5, verse 33. This is what the sermon is based on. It's called Love and Respect. And here in Ephesians 5:33, Paul concludes his counsels on marriage by giving gender-specific advice. He says earlier, husbands, love your wives as Jesus loved the church and gave himself for it. He says to women, submit to your husbands. And then in verse 33, the Bible says, "Nevertheless, let each one of you," speaking to husbands in particular, "so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband." So, Paul does not say to wives to love their husbands. And he doesn't say to husbands to respect their wives, though they're supposed to do that. A husband is supposed to respect his wife, and a wife is supposed to love her husband. But they do that naturally, of course, assuming that they're both good people and they really love each other and that there is an element of goodwill between the two of them. But what Paul is saying here is that even among two good people that really care for each other, it is not natural for the husband to show unconditional love to the wife. And it's not natural for the wife to show unconditional respect to the husband. And Paul, very gender specifically, and I believe both scripture and social science proves that women react negatively to their husband when they don't feel loved and cherished, and husbands react negatively to their wives when they don't feel respected. And they're two different things. Love and respect are two very different things, and we're going to unpack that today, showing different examples. But you have a cycle that takes place, and there's a dynamic between men and women. And we'll give you just one example, and I think most couples and most men and women, even if you're not married, will relate to this, that men withdraw and women chase after when there's a conflict. And, if the shoe doesn't fit, don't wear it. This is a generalization, but there is a well-known and respected University of Washington psychology professor who did a study, and he studied a 20-year period over 2,000 couples, and he identified a pattern. This is not a Christian study, although I believe it corresponds with what Paul is saying here. And it describes in his study a pattern that is called wife demand, husband withdraw. Okay? Wife demand, husband withdraw. And you're going to see how it relates to Paul's counsel. And essentially, what Gottman was tapping into was a strong undercurrent of love and respect. This is in his own words, the direct opposite of an antidote for contempt, perhaps the most corrosive force in marriage. When men feel like things are not going well, they withdraw. When women feel like things are not going well, they confront, okay? And they demand. And confront can look in various ways depending on the personality of the woman. And both of them are doing that because of how much they care for each other. When the man withdraws, the woman perceives that as an act of hostility, when in reality, he's doing that because he cares for her in the relationship. He wants to save it. When the woman confronts or demands, she's doing that because she cares. But how does he see it? As an act of hostility. Okay? So I'm going to talk about the man's perspective in just a moment. But Melissa, why would a woman see it as an act of hostility when a man withdraws? And why does a woman naturally want to talk about it, deal with it? Why does she demand resolution?
Well, women by nature like resolution, and they like to bring things full circle. Whereas a man, if he has a problem with another man, they might, when they reconcile, they might just not talk about it at all. And like, we're just going to be friends again, and then forget that the problem existed and just move on. Whereas women, they can't bring resolution that way. They need to talk about it and bring it full circle, and for there to be a closure to the problem that brought the break in the relationship. And so for this reason, and that closure happens through talking. And women in general seems to help them process their emotions when they talk about it. And so that's why when a man withdraws, it appears to her that he doesn't care. He doesn't want to bring resolution. The relationship is not important to him. He doesn't want to bring reconciliation. And so that's why a woman perceives that as hostile. And a woman will not be able to go on and pretend the next day like it didn't happen unless she brings that full circle. Now, one thing we do have to learn when we get married is that sometimes there's some things that are not that important, and maybe as women we need to learn to just put it aside and not bring it back up, because that's his way of dealing. And there's other things that we got to choose our battles where, for us, we need resolution. We need to bring this full circle. We have to tell our husbands, look, I can't pretend like this didn't happen and just be reconciled unless we bring this full circle.
Well, thank you for sharing that. We're going to hear from Melissa again in just a moment. But we mentioned last week, and we want to just share with you for just a moment, this book. It's called Love and Respect. If you've never read it and you really feel like things are not going well in your relationship, and it doesn't have to be marriage, it can be any relationship where you're struggling with the opposite sex. Now, there are good books about interpersonal relationships in general, but this is a book that especially taps into this gender-specific counsel in Ephesians 5 that says that women should respect their husbands and husbands should love their wives. It's called Love and Respect, written from a very Christian perspective. Dr. Emerson Eggerichs did a study. He asked 7,000 people, when in a conflict with your spouse, do you feel unloved or disrespected? And there's a mistake here. You see, 72% of women said, I feel unloved. And 83% of the men. Now, you can see that there are exceptions to the rule, but do you see how there is a pattern, both from a social science and a Christian perspective, where when a woman feels that there's a problem in the relationship, she walks away thinking, he doesn't love me. And when a man feels that there's tension building, he walks away thinking, she doesn't respect me. 83% of the men in this survey said, I feel disrespected. 72% of women feel that they feel unloved. They say they feel unloved. And so I want you to, we're just going to spend a few minutes listening to Dr. Eggerichs. It's a short clip, and you'll get a sense of what the book is like. There's a little bit of humor, and I think the humor is actually very healthy because, as you know, if you've been married and if you've been in a very tense relationship, sometimes you need to laugh about it, but it's very serious at the same time. And the truth is, and as Emerson Eggerichs brings out, a lot of people are getting divorced, and they think, well, maybe our problems is finances, or maybe it's not a good sex life, or it may be the children. And Emerson Eggerichs believes that these are all the symptoms of a deeper problem, which is founded on Ephesians 5, which is the issue of love and respect. And all the other problems we fight over stem back to that root issue. So we're going to hear from him, and then we'll discuss it a little more.
Well, in 1973, my wife Sarah and I met at Wheaton College, and we were newlyweds. And in Chicago areas where Wheaton is, and my parents, I grew up in Peoria, Illinois, which is several hours south, and we decided to go home there for the weekend. At that time, I wore contact lenses, and I got to Peoria, and I was going to bed, and I realized I had forgotten my contact lens case. So what am I going to do? So I decided to improvise. I got 2 juice glasses, filled them with water, and took my one contact out, put it in the juice glass, took the other one out and put it in. And then I took both juice glasses and placed them on the back of the toilet and went to bed. Don't get ahead of me. So the next morning I awakened, poured the one out, yeah, there it is, and put it in and poured out the other. And there was no second contact. It was nowhere. I mean, I looked at the inside, it was nowhere. So I go out, my wife Sarah's with my mom and dad in the kitchen, and I said, Sarah, did you do anything with those 2 juice glasses on the back of the toilet in the middle of the night or anything? She says, no. Yes, I did. I got up in the middle of the night and took a pill and used one of those juice glasses. She drank my contact. I was in disbelief. I couldn't believe it. I said, I can't believe that you drank my contact. She said, well, I can't believe that you put your contact in a juice glass. Well, I can't believe that you drank out of a juice glass on the back of a toilet. And we had this moment of heated fellowship. And as newlyweds, as a young 20-something, I was angry. I couldn't believe she'd done this, you know? And I'm getting more and more, and my mom and dad are witnessing this, and I'm just, here we are. And at a certain point, Sarah's spirit deflated. Have you ever had a conflict with someone like your spouse or close family member when you have an issue that's going on here, when suddenly the issue is no longer the issue? And you see the spirit of the person deflate? My question is, what is the issue when the issue isn't the issue? Something else was going on in Sarah at that moment, and I'll come back to that in a second. Fast forward, it's Christmas time, and again we go down to Peoria to be with my mom and dad over Christmas. And Sarah was raised in Indiana. She's a Hoosier. Her dad had over 2,000 acres of corn. She's a farm girl. She was Miss Congeniality of Boone County, and she can do it all, the 4-H stuff and sewing and everything. Well, I didn't know it, but she made me a jean jacket. And this was her special Christmas gift to me, and it was that last gift that you give, right? And so that moment came Christmas morning, and she now hands me her last and the best gift, and she's grinning, and I open it up. It's a jean jacket. And I put it on. I said, thank you. And I'm looking at it, and she said, you don't like it. No, I do like it. You don't like it, she says. Sarah, no, I like it. You don't like it. I said, Sarah, why are you telling me that I don't like it? Because in our family, when we like something, we go, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I said, in our family, we say thank you. And during that moment, my spirit just kind of deflated. And I kind of just disengaged. Why? Because it wasn't about the jean jacket at that moment. And I didn't get in tune exactly with what I was feeling until years later, but I remember that scene. Because you see, the issue wasn't the issue at that moment. Something else was going on in my spirit, and I wasn't totally in tune with what it was. I'm going to share with you today that there are 2 key ingredients for successful relationships, primarily in marriage, the research we're going to point out in just a second, and also what the scripture says, but there is application in any relationship between men and women where you basically care about the other person. It applies because it's really a male and female, not a husband-wife issue. And I'm going to propose to you that when the issue isn't the issue with the woman, there's usually one thing that's going on in her spirit at that moment in time. Just one. See if I can make the case. You don't have to buy into that contention at this point. And when the issue isn't the issue with the man, there's one thing going on in him. And again, just one in most cases. What's fascinating is that they're not the same one thing. That one thing in her is different. That one thing in him is different from the one thing in her. And this is why it makes it interesting, because when that spirit deflates, we have a tendency to see them as childish. Oh, brother. Oh, what? Oh. Now what did I say? And I'm not exaggerating with some of you. So So what are these two key ingredients that make for successful relationships? The University of Washington studied 2,000 couples. We'll look at the research first. 2,000 couples for 20 years in their love laboratory. And in this love laboratory, they were not only taking copious notes, clinical psychologists and social workers and different things, they were videotaping. They also had husbands and wives connected with what we call BPMs. They were measuring the beats per minute of the heart, the physiology, what was going on, because as people stay in that kind of a situation, you let your hair down. And you just kind of are yourself. And they kind of just said, be yourself, you know? And so at a certain point, people just react to each other like they would in the home. They weren't always feeling they were under, supervision. It's just be yourself. And as they got into this, over this 20-year period, they said, we now know the two key ingredients for successful marriages. And when those two ingredients are present, the marriage generally succeeds. When those two are not there, the marriage will fail. And of course, think bell curve here. There's no dogmatic absolute. If they're always present, the relationship will succeed. If they're not, but in the huge, vast, statistically significant way, these are the two key ingredients. Well, what did they say they were? Love and respect. And they said it doesn't make any difference, certain factors, certain variables. I mean, it didn't make any difference the age of the couple, didn't make any difference how much money they had, their economic status. It didn't make any difference on any front. They could have been the volatile type couples or the avoidant type couples. And volatile doesn't mean violent, it just means, they're very expressive with each other. Others just don't deal with conflict, they just are quiet. It didn't make any difference the style of argument, economic status, number of children, etc. What they found is those relationships that succeeded were carried along with a tone of love and respect toward each other while they were dealing with those real issues. In other words, people think if we didn't have money problems, we'd have a great relationship. No, that's not true. It's the lack of love and respect you show toward the spirit of the other person while you're addressing the money problems. There are people in India who have no money but have great marriages. There are people with more money than they know what to do with and have horrible marriages. There's no correlation. The stress is real, but what the stress simply does is reveal who we are. It doesn't cause us to be who we are. It reveals whether or not I'm going to choose to be a loving person, respectful person toward you while I'm upset with you. Even though I'm mad, I'm going to show a positive regard toward your spirit while I'm addressing the issue. And if I don't do that, you're going to deflate at a certain point because you're vulnerable to hostility and contempt or the appearance of it. And so we mislead ourselves. If we didn't have the in-law issues, if we didn't have the child issues, if we didn't have the work relationship issues, if we didn't have the employment problems, if we didn't have the money issues, health issues, I mean, you can go on and on and on and on. And these are real issues. We're not minimizing. Some of you lose a 5-year-old child to cancer and the child dies. I mean, these are real issues. But they're not the cause of the relationship ending in divorce. They just bring out that which is there. And as painful as that is, it's really an excitement should generate from this because we realize we can control far more than we think. We're not helpless, hopeless victims, although we feel it that way at certain moments. But as the University of Washington studied those 2,000 couples for 20 years and found love and respect as the two key ingredients, they saw some gender differences. For instance, during these conflicting moments between this man and woman, they discovered over 2,000 couples, 20 years, that 85% of those who at a certain point withdrew and stonewalled and just backed away from the emotional argument, the conflict, is the male. 85%. This isn't pigeonholing the man. This is not stereotyping the man. This is a pattern that's predictable. It's statistically significant, off the charts. He withdraws. Now, 15% of the women withdraw. My mother withdrew from my father. My dad had rage issues. When I was 2.5, 3 years old, I saw him attempt to strangle my mother. There were issues that wounded me. I was eventually sent to a military school from age 13 to 18. So I come out of a family, we were not Christ followers, that had some real challenges. My mother withdrew, but women withdraw for different reasons. They withdraw out of fear that their emotions are going to be dismissed, that they're going to be put down. The husband's going to justify himself and blame her. And so she shuts down, not because she wants to, but because she feels there's no point in connecting because he won't be responsive to me. Men, on the other hand, withdraw for a different reason. But the women were asked, why does your husband do this? They didn't know. And they said, well, what do you feel when he withdraws from you? And they said this, it feels like an act of hostility. The opposite of love. It feels like he hates me. Act of hostility is what they say. But I've been studying men for a long time, and I know that from that research and also my own research, that they discovered that when men are in these conflicted moments, their heartbeats get to 99 beats per minute, the BPMs. That's what we call warrior mode. That's what happens to a man physiologically before he throws himself on a hand grenade to save his buddies in war. This is what happens to him when someone invades your home and is about to hurt you as his wife. This is the adrenaline that comes over him that literally leads him to his own death. He doesn't cower in fear. He just moves, that energy moves into a quick rescue kind of thing. So it's either fight, or if you're with somebody you care about, it's got to be flight. You got to calm down. If I was best friends with a guy and we were, guys get mad at each other, we're lethal. At a certain point, we don't fight with words, we fight with our fist, and we could hurt each other. We know that, so we just drop it, forget it. I'm so sick and tired. But we exit, because we're best of friends. We would die for each other if we don't kill each other. We're best buddies. And so you disengage. Why? Because it's the honorable thing to do. It's the honor code. It's what men do. It's the honorable thing to de-escalate a conflict with which at the end of the day is really not that big of a deal. It's not worth getting in a fight over and hurting somebody. So my question is this. Is it an act of hostility? Or is it an act of honor? The answer is yes. It just depends on whether you videotape in pink or videotape in blue. Unless there's an intrinsic evil going on, you're fighting over, should we, honey, or should we not sell the kids? But almost every conflict is a preference issue. Should we go to the Christian school or the secular school? Should we go to this church or that church? Should we have this color carpet or that color carpet? And these are real conflicts. Should we spend money or should we save the money? Should we have my mother move in with us or no? But these are not evil. You might think that it is, but it's just not an evil situation. Intrinsically, it's not evil. It's a choice, it's an opinion, it's an interest, it's a preference. And we have these clashing preferences. But during these conflicts, he withdraws. So is that evil? Is that really an act of hostility? From a woman's perspective, yes, it feels very unloving. From a man's perspective, it's an act of honor. But they also did something interesting is they watched the women. They had the clinical psychologists, social workers, and they would be listening to these conversations. Yeah, there she is again, criticism, complaint. Criticism, complaint. Oh, there's a complaint. Yep, there's a criticism. Complaint, criticism, complaint, criticism. But that's not politically correct. Yeah, I know. What should we do? Lie? No, we can't. We got to tell the truth. Yep, there's a complaint. There's a criticism. There's a complaint. There's criticism. And the men were asked, what do you feel when she keeps criticizing? Ongoing criticism just feels like she's got contempt for who I am as a human being. I think she's just using this topic as another opportunity to send me a message she doesn't like who I am. She finds me inadequate and doesn't respect me. But in all my research of women, one of the things I've espoused over the last 15 years is women confront to connect. I had a dentist guy say to me once, no, my wife confronts to control me. No, really, she was sitting there. She confronts to get, nope, she confronts to control me. I said, no, it's exactly what you're saying. I confront because I need to connect. I want to connect with him. I said, I believe she confronts to connect because she cares. She criticizes because she cares. She complains because she cares. She moves forward to confront because she cares, to connect, to resolve this issue. So it raises the question, during these conflicted moments, is it an act of contempt or is it an act of care? The answer is yes. It just depends on whether or not you're videotaping in pink or blue. Neither are wrong, we're just different.
I like that phrase, not wrong but different. See, we believe that God created men and women differently. I want to share another example with you. Melissa might have touched on it last week, and I don't know if she did or not. I just can't remember because I mentioned this at Hardin because I was sharing the same topic. But I've been thinking about the death of one of our parents because Melissa's mom has Lou Gehrig's disease, and we've been preparing for death, and I've often thought about what it would be like to lose my mother. And having gotten to know Melissa over the last 11 years as her husband, I know that she needs a shoulder to cry on. She needs me to embrace her in her moment of vulnerability. And I've been thinking to myself, what will it be like when I have to grieve? What would I want? Do I want a shoulder to cry on, or do I just want to go and be by myself and process this and grieve alone? And I realize that my needs are different than her needs. And we're not trying to stereotype. And like I said, if the shoe doesn't fit, don't wear it. But at least in our case, the things that Eggerichs points out in his love and respect thesis has really fit us, because I find that I want to withdraw. I want to be alone. I don't want to be vulnerable in her presence. I feel like the best thing to save the moment and to keep our relationship healthy is to just walk away. And she wants to talk about it. She wants to bring it full circle, and she wants to resolve. And that's her need, and it's not wrong. It's different. And that's my need. It's not wrong. It's different. And so what's the solution? I'll get to that in the end. But, as we look at these different scenarios, we have to understand why the other feels the way they do in order for us to meet each other's needs. That's exactly what Paul was doing in Ephesians 5. He's saying, husbands, love your wives, because he knew that it is not the natural thing to do. And wives, respect. And when you look at men interacting with men, they understand the respect thing. And when you see women interacting with women, they understand the connect thing. And so think about how you process love as a woman. What are some of the things that communicates love? Anyone want to share something? A birthday card, flowers, or, okay, being listened to. And in your case, does it necessarily mean that the person that's listening needs to offer advice and fix your problem? You want to know that they understand and that they are getting what you're saying and that they're seeing it as you are explaining it, but not necessarily to give advice. So, and this happens a lot in our marriage, and we've gone over this over and over again. When she starts talking about a problem, I automatically want to tell her what I think is best to address it. And as it turns out, that's not necessarily what she's looking for. She wants to be listened to. But here's the thing, it's funny. When I have a problem, I only share it with her if I absolutely have to, because I believe she is going to be able to offer a solution to the problem. Do you see the difference? Very different. Because men don't like to open up. It's stereotypical, I know, and there are definitely exceptions to the rule, but I happen to be one of them, and I think the research shows that most men are like this. They don't like to open up about their feelings. Okay? Just from observation and my own experience. And they'll only talk about a problem if they feel like their buddy is able to address it. Right? So I have a question now. I don't know if some of the men would like to just shout out an example or two. What makes you feel respected or disrespected? Anybody care to? I have a really good one, and it actually isn't an example in our relationship because Melissa just doesn't do this, but I've seen a lot of wives do this, and it's what Emerson describes as deflating the spirit of the other person. You know, men also have their spirits deflated. They just react differently. But I've seen a lot of men, and I've seen it on their countenances, when their wives embarrass them in public. There are different ways that it can be done. But I don't know if you've ever seen it or experienced it, but when they embarrass them in public. And it's usually something that they themselves, as wives, wouldn't mind because it's not, from their perspective, something that would make them feel disrespected. It just makes them feel vulnerable. And women just seem to have a better time being vulnerable. That's why women cry in public more often than men. I may be offending some people who are watching or listening to this right now because they think it's sexist and it's, you're stereotyping, but we're just generalizing here. There are exceptions to the rule, but you'll observe that, and it may be culturally and socially learned. It may not even be necessarily only something that God wired us to be, but men just seem to cry less in public. Isn't that something you've observed too? And it's because they have a reluctance to be vulnerable. And so when a wife makes a certain remark about the husband in public that can be very embarrassing, he feels slighted and disrespected. And she may not understand why, because for her it may not be as big of a deal. And there are things he does sometimes that makes her feel unloved, and he doesn't understand why, because it's not something that would make him feel unloved. For example, a woman is complaining about her weight and how she doesn't feel she looks good. The husband goes and buys her a diet book. That's a helpful way to address her problem. How does she feel? Unloved, right? When a wife buys a book like this and says, honey, we need to read this together, how does he feel? Like he's inadequate. A marriage book is him feeling like she's saying that he's not a good husband. Now, if the husband were to buy the same book and say, honey, can we read this together? I believe most wives would say yes, because improving the relationship is a priority for her, right? And if the wife were to buy a diet book for the husband, he might not perceive it the way she does, the diet book. So we're different. We just have to acknowledge that. And there are cases where these examples actually fit reversely. That's true. But I guess the message, the point is that we have to step outside of our own situation and into the shoes of the other person to understand why they feel the way they do and what their inherent needs are. Because we naturally see what is done to us before we see what we are doing to our partner. That's why Jesus had to say, Matthew 7:12, do unto others as you would want them to do to you. In order to do that, you have to step outside of yourself into their shoes to understand what it is that they would want you to do to them. Try to understand the deep emotional needs of your spouse, which leads her to complain and demand. It's funny, in the book of Proverbs, Solomon says it's better to remind me. live on the corner of the house or live on the roof of the house, I think, in one place, than to dwell with I don't know what your versions say, but I think some versions say a nagging wife. And it really means a wife that is complaining and demanding, but she does that because often she feels unloved and slighted in the relationship. A good wife who is complaining and nagging is just crying out for a change that is desperately needed, but the husband perceives that as hostility towards him, and it leads him to withdraw, which leads her to interpret it as a lack of love, which causes her to react disrespectful by nagging and complaining, which makes him withdraw further. And so what you have is this cycle that often widens the gap between the two and leads to divorce. Men respond to respect. Women respond to love. I believe that's why Paul gave his gender-specific counsel. In this cycle, couples are repeating the problem. Without love, the wife reacts negatively, which means without respect, to her husband, and without respect, the husband reacts negatively, without love, to the wife. And there is a way to break the cycle. Matthew 7:12. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But that requires stepping into their shoes, empathizing and listening and trying to understand. And what makes it difficult is we're not in tune sometimes with how we really feel, so we don't even know how to articulate it to the person that's hurting us. It makes it difficult. But that's just really a scratching the surface, introductory message to this concept. And if you feel that you'd like to look further into this to understand better the dynamics, excellent book. I think Melissa mentioned last week we read it in our first 30 days of marriage. Somebody gave it to us as a gift, our wedding gift. And there are videos. You can type Emerson Eggerichs on YouTube and look at some of the sermons. Good stuff. Melissa, is there anything you want to add before we close? Why don't you come up and lead us in song then as we finish? And if something comes to your mind, you can share it.
Well, I do have one last thing. One concept that Emerson Eggerichs brings out in the book, towards the end of the book, that I've found to be the most impacting on me is sometimes when you're in a conflict with your husband or your wife, you need to see Christ behind them. And sometimes it's hard to react lovingly to that person because you're so hurt. But if you see, I need to treat them like I want to treat Christ and see Christ instead, then I thought that was a revolutionary thought. You got to see Christ right there standing behind your husband, behind your wife. Say, I'm going to treat them not the way that they deserve to be treated, but the way that Christ deserves to be treated. And that can really help make that difference, because someone has to make the first step. Someone has to say, I'm going to treat my husband with respect even though I feel unloved. Or I'm going to treat my wife with love even when I feel disrespected, when you're going through the real serious conflicts. And if both are going to be like children and decide that they're going to turn their backs and wait for the other to go first, then it might not go anywhere. But when someone can rise above the problem and be the first one to act and be the one to react and treat the other person like Christ, then that can make the world of a difference.
In many cases, not all, when one breaks the cycle, let's say the wife decides that she's going to just unconditionally be respectful to her husband, not in an abusive relationship. All that we've said here does not apply if someone is in an abusive relationship. But let's say she's married to an otherwise very good man, but just doesn't know how to do the love, doesn't remember birthdays, doesn't remember whatever it is that she feels unloved. But if she can unconditionally be respectful, 1 Peter chapter 3 says, the believing wife can win the unbelieving husband by showing respect to her husband. Read it there in 1 Peter 3, verses 1 and 2. It's beautiful. A wife that has the right spirit, she can break that cycle and she can actually win him. And the same thing with a husband. He lives with a nagging wife and he therefore withdraws. If he breaks that cycle, as she says, makes the initiative, in many cases, the response will be what they're looking for. Somebody has to start. So whatever the relationship is that's gone sour, make an initiative, be humble, and unconditionally love or respect the person, and you might find that their attitude may change. Doesn't always happen, but often it does.
And loving and respecting the other doesn't mean you're going to agree with everything they say or go along with all their plans. It's just an attitude of how you treat them.
That's a good point.